We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 56a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing if you have a Meitzar, which is like a boundary line between two properties, or you have a Chatzav, which is also like a boundary line of bushes or trees between the two properties. So the question is that going to be considered a separation when it comes to Hilchas Shabbos? And the Gemara now is in the middle of bringing a Brisa, which brings Rabbi Yossi's opinion, where he explains that there is a distinction when you have one Rishus or two Rishuyos, as the Brisa now continues. B'Rishus Achas, Rabbi Yossi says, let's say you have a situation where you bring a half a grogros out to one place and a half a grogros out to the other, but it's all one Rishus. So then Chayiv, then the person is going to be Chayiv, meaning to say the two half grogros are going to be mitzdaref, that you did carry the amount that you're liable for carrying to a different Rishus on Shabbos. But b'shtei Rishuyos, but if it's two separate Rishuyos, so then Potter, so then you're going to be Potter. And the Rashbam explains B'Rishus Achas, meaning B'Rishus Haravim Atzma, meaning let's say it's the same Rishus Haravim, Shehotzi B'Chatzi Grogros Rishon, that same Rishus Haravim that he brought the first half Grogros, Ba'osa Atzma Hotzi Ha'achron, in the very same Rishus Haravim he brought the second one. So then you're mitzdarif, you join them together, and we say the person is chayiv. However, B'Shtei Rishuyos Haravim, let's say you brought it to two different public domains, Hamuflogim Zemizah, which are separated from one another. So then Potter, then he's going to be Potter the Rishuyos Mechal, because he holds that the fact that it's two different rishuyos, meaning two different rishus haravims, that is able to divide the two actions. We're not mitzdaref them together, and that's why it's going to be potter. And so now the question is, what kind of separation do you need between the two rishus haravims? And the Gemara here continues, V'yamar Rabba, and Rabba says, V'hu sheyesh chiyav chatos beineim. He says you have to actually have a real rishus hayachid between the two rishus haravims. That's called a chiyav chatos, because when you carry from rishus haravim to rishus hayachid, that's a deoraisa, carrying from one rishus to another. That's a chayav chatas. That's the only kind of separation that would really separate the rishus harabim into two separate rishuyos. Aval karmelis lo, but let's say you have a karmelis, which is, for example, let's say a valley that's between them. It's not really a rishus hayachid. It's just what we would understand as a rishus harabim at a drabanan level. That's not enough to create that separation. Abaye Amar Abaye says afilu karmelis. Even a karmelis can create the separation in the rishus harabim, that it's now two separate rishuyos, two separate rishus harabims. Aval pisla lo, but let's say you just have a pisla. The Rashbam says, Avol Pisla lo kagon chati chaseit. So, you have like a piece of wood, or let's say you have some kind of pillar, that is not going to be a separation according to Abaya. But Rava says, Afilu Pisla. Rava says, even if you have just a Pisla, that's going to be the separation, and that's the same thing as a Meitzar and a Chatzav. That's the same Rava. That's Rava from the previous Amud, that even a boundary line, or even the Chatzav, even if you have these bushes that are separating, even a small separation is enough to create two Rishuyos in terms of this halacha. And the Gemara continues, V'yazda Rava l'taimi, and Rava here is following his reasoning in terms of a different halacha, Diyamar Rava, because Rava says, Rishus Shabbos k'Rishus Gittin Dami. When it comes to the Rishus of Shabbos, that's the same as the Rishus of Gittin when it comes to the halachas by Gittin. And the Rashbam explains, V'yazda Rava l'taimi damar le'el afilu l'inyan Shabbos. Again, Rava says that the Meitzar, the Chatzav, it's considered to be a separation for Shabbos, because Shabbos is k'Rishus Gittin Dami. It's the same as the halachas that we find by Get. The Amrina b'Meseches Gittin ba'Zorek, because we say in Parak HaZorek, in Meseches Gittin, dim hikna lo chatzeru his garish. Let's say he gave her his chatzer, he gave her a place in his chatzer, that's where he's going to put the get and she'll be divorced. V'zorak lo get, he threw the get to that area, v'nafal ala pisla shebechatzer. But then it says, let's say it fell onto just like this piece of wood that's in his chatzer, eina migureshes, then she's not divorced. The pisla is considered like its own location. It's independent of the rest of the chatzer. V'eno bechlal chatzer, it's not included as part of the chatzer. The chatzer hikna lo v'lo pisla, he gave her chatzer, he didn't give her the pisla. Techad makom moshel inish, trei makomos lo moshel inish, a person gives one location, not two. Hachim mefarshin lahasam, that's how it's explained over there. V'kama Rava, Rishus Shabbos domel Rishus Gittin, that's exactly what Rava is saying. When it comes to Shabbos, it's the same as it is by Gittin. The hachinami in Shabbos have a hach pisla makom choshev b'fnei atzmo. The pisla is going to be considered its own important area, its own important location. Umechalek rishuyos, it divides the rishuyos from one another. Im hu memutza bein time, if it's between them. Techayechi de lo batel pisla lagabe chatzer, just like it's not nullified in terms of the chatzer, it's its own area. Hachinami lo batel hachal in Shabbos lagabe Rishus Harabim. The same thing is true when it comes to this halacha in terms of Hilchas Shabbos, in terms of Rishus Harabim. And the Gemara continues, Ein sham lo meitzer v'lo chatzav. What if you didn't have a boundary line over there? You didn't have a separation using these bushes or trees? And the Rashbam explains the question. V'kaboy Gemara, the Gemara is now asking, Li Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar hameitzer v'hachatzav mafsikin b'nichse hager. He says when you have the boundary line or the chatzav, that is a separation in terms of taking ownership of the property of the convert, meaning shelo yikna bechezkas chavero at sheyachzik b'shtein. It's going to be considered two separate properties, so you're not going to make, let's say you make a chazak in one of them, it's not going to be a chazak in the other, you have to make a chazak in both. V'im ein sham lo meitzer v'lo chatzav. So the Gemara is now asking, what if you didn't have any boundary lines? De'ena misuyemes b'mitzret, it's not a clear boundary surrounding the property. Mali amar Rabbi Yochanan, what would Rabbi Yochanan say? Kama tzarech lahachzik sheyikna hakol. How much of a chazaka do you have to make to get the whole thing? And the Rashbam points out, the ilu Rav Shmuel amru le'el. Now Rav and Shmuel, they already answered this earlier. They said, Kida'azal Taira de Turev Hadr, that it has to be the amount, like the ox goes in one direction and then returns, essentially like 2 rows. That's how much of a chazaka you have to make. So we already know the answer to this question according to Rav and Shmuel. But since we see Rabbi Yochanan in general has different shiurim, that's why the Gemara is asking this over here. And the Gemara continues and answers, Perish Rabbi Marinus Mishmo. Rabbi Marinus explains in his name. We'll see the Rashbam in a moment. Kol shenikras al shemo means any area that's called by that name. If that whole area is called by one name, that's one area. You make a chazak in that area, you get that whole area. And the Gemara says, hey Chidami, what exactly are the circumstances? How would it be called by one name? Amar Papa says, the Karule, for example, they call it Beigar Gusa de Planya. This is the area where so-and-so's well, it irrigates this whole area, so that whole area is going to be considered like one makom, like one place. And the Rashbam explains, Perish Rabbi Marinus Mishmo Shel Rabbi Yochanan, the way the Rashbam understands. Rabbi Marinus explains in the name of Rabbi Yochanan as follows: Kol shenikras al shemo, kol shenikras al sada echad b'loshen yachid al shemo. You're calling in a singular, you call this one field. As long as it's referred to as this one unit, one field, shekaron la sada ploni, it's called the field of so-and-so. Shein omer sados ploni, you don't use plural, you don't say the fields of so-and-so. So then, kana hakol b'makosh echad, so then with one strike, with one action of plowing, you'll be able to acquire the whole thing. For example, Beigar Gusa de Planya means Kol Hasada Shaya Hager Mashke Miboro. Let's say the entire field, the convert would irrigate it from this one particular pit, from his pit. Kon Hakol b'makosh echad. Again, you would get the entire thing with just one strike, one pounding of the earth. And the Gemara continues, Yosef Rav Acha bar Avia Kamei de Ravasi. Rav Acha bar Avia was sitting in front of Ravasi. V'Yosef v'kamra mishmei de Ravasi bar Chanina, and he was sitting and saying, in the name of Ravasi bar Chanina, as follows, Chatzuva. Again, if you have this Chatzav, that's what we mentioned, these are the bushes or trees that create this boundary. Mafsik menichse hager, that is the separation when it comes to the properties of the convert, as we said above. And the Gemara says, my Chatzuva, what exactly is this Chatzuva? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says, the Rav says, Shabotichem Yehoshua liYisrael es haaretz. It was with these trees that Yehoshua created the boundaries in Eretz Yisrael. Let's say he had to make boundaries between Shvatim, etc. That's what he used. He used these kinds of plants. V'yamar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and Rav Yehuda says, the Rav says, Lo mani Yehoshua el ayoros ha'omdos ala gvulin. When Yehoshua, and Sefer Yehoshua, when he's counting various cities, why didn't he pick all the cities? Why is he picking some in particular? Because these were always on some kind of border. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Kol shereu HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe, anything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed to Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Moshe in Sefer Devarim, he showed him Eretz Yisrael. So any lands that were shown to Moshe Rabbeinu, Chayev Meiser, those are going to be considered like Eretz Yisrael in terms of the obligations of Meiser. The Gemara says, Lafuke Mai, what does that come to exclude? What lands are not going to be obligated in Meiser? And the Gemara says, Lafuke Keni, Knizi, V'Kadmoni, the lands of the Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni, those would not be included. And the Gemara continues, Tanya will end in a brayser. Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, Naftucha, Arva, V'Shalma. These three areas, the Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni, are Naftucha, Arva, and Shalma. That's 3 places. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Harseir, Ammon, and Moav. It refers to Harseir, Ammon, and Moav. And finally, a third opinion, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Ardiskis, Asya, V'Aspamia. It refers to these 3 places, Ardiskis, Asya, and Aspamia. And the Rashbam explains, Kol shereu HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe, anything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed to Moshe, b'shas misaso, meaning at the time of his death, K'dechsiv vayareu Hashem es kol haaretz es hagilad adon, it says he showed him all of the land, so Chayiv and Meiser, all of those lands are going to be Chayiv and Meiser, Deheimim Zayin Amimim, Haksuvim b'chol makom, those are the 7 nations that are always written throughout the Torah. And the Rashbam continues, Avol Keni, Knizi, v'Kadmoni, shenosnu li Avram Avinu bein habesarim, but the Keni, Knizi, and Kadmoni, which were given over to Avram Avinu, lo yischayivu b'Meiser losid lavu, in the future, when we have those lands, they're not going to be obligated in Meiser. Kashiyachzirim lanu la'asid kedamar b'Bereishis Rabbah. Again, when we return those lands in the future, like it says in Bereishis Rabbah, inami orim kavshu Yisrael mehem achrei mos Yoshua. Let's say Klal Yisrael conquers those areas after the death of Yoshua. Kulan peturim and Meiser, they'll be parted from Meiser. Techsiv asam, it's written over there. Zos arts hashanish badi v'gomer zos lemuutei hani shenitosvu le'avram ala shvua kein yirabeina. That's what zos is coming to exclude these lands. And the Rashbam also says Tanya Rabbi Meir Omer. Again, this is is a brisa kulu hani tanai. All these tanoim, this machlokas tanoim here at the end, befeirush de keni knizi v'kadmoni pligi. They're arguing how do we explain, meaning what are these places, keni knizi and kadmoni. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, hayushnayim mi'idino so sha'achla shalosh shanim. Let's say you have two witnesses that testify about a certain person that he's been on the land for 3 years, that he's established a chazaka. They're trying to give him the land and not the prior owner. V'nimtzu zomimim. Then it turns out that they're actually false witnesses. Other witnesses come in and say, how can you testify that he's been on the land? You're not even in this area. You've been with us in a different place the whole time. So then Edom Zomin have to pay whatever it is they were trying to obligate the defendant. They have to pay back the defendant. So Mashalm and Lo Esakol, they have to pay him for this entire land. They're trying to make the prior owner lose his land. They're trying to give it to the person who's been sitting on the land right now. Turns out that they're Edom Zomin, so they have to pay him the value of the land. And the Mishnah continues, Shnayim Barishona, Shnayim Bishniya, Ushnayim Bishlishis. Let's say you have two witnesses testify that he was there for the first year, for 1 year. A different two witnesses testify he was there the second year. A different two witnesses testify he was there the third year. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis.